Welcome to our introductory lesson. You're probably here because you want to learn how to program. The aim of this video is to show you what programming looks like, how Boolean works, and what you will be able to do by the end of the course. If by the end of this video you're ready to take the next step, our 6-month course is here to take you from 0 to hero. By the end of the course, you will be able to create your web pages using HTML and CSS, add behavior to those pages using JavaScript, make it more modern using React, make it more scalable and maintainable using TypeScript, add your own backends using Node.js, and finally, make it more robust by adding testing and computer science principles. In short, we will give you everything you need to know to have the best possible start to your career. Not just that, by the end, we will also help you land your first job, or you get your money back. Now, let's start with our lesson, shall we? In this lesson, we're going to be looking at HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to create web pages. HTML is what helps us dictate what goes on the page. CSS is what helps us style things on the page, so make them look the way we want them to. And finally, JavaScript is there to add behavior. So if a user clicks, we want to react in some way and do some action. I like to think of it as HTML being the bones of the application, CSS being the skin, and then JavaScript being the brains of the operation. Now, to get started, let's head over to codesandbox.io. This is an online editor, and it will allow you to build websites without having to install anything on your machine, so we can get going quite quickly. Now, hit the new sandbox, and now here, there's an option for a static website. If you don't see static here, just come here and type static, and that will filter the options through the magnifying glass. So once you see static, just click on that, and it will open a new window. And you can see in this window, we have the website on the right, then some code here, and then files here on the left. Now, to keep this minimal, I'm going to click on this little Explorer tab, and that's going to close the file. We don't need that. I'm also going to hit Command-Shift-F or Control-Shift-F if you're in a Windows machine, and that's actually going to make the size a little bit smaller so we can actually work more comfortably. Now, finally, I don't really want to go into what all of this means today. It's just too much and we don't need that. So let's select all of this stuff in the editor and just get rid of it by pressing backspace. Whenever you see the little circle at the top, that means that the file has not been saved yet. So if you hit Command-S or Control-S on a Windows machine, that's going to allow you to save the file. And you can see that when you save the file, what's happening is we're also refreshing the web page. So you can see the results as you go along. Now, to get started, let's just write a book title. Then let's write a chapter, or maybe even better, chapter 1. Then chapter 2 and chapter 3. We can stop there for now. Now you can imagine that each chapter is going to be filled with some paragraph. So this is the first paragraph of the first chapter. Then you can imagine we're going to have the second one here and the third one here. So you may have guessed, we're trying to write a book. So that's what we're going to be using for our example. So second and third, and if we save it, boom, look what happened there. That's not great. We're trying to write HTML. So that's how we're getting started. We have index.html. However, we're not quite writing HTML yet. We're just writing plain text. And you can see that the computer is getting a little bit confused and is chucking everything together, and it doesn't look good on the page. Don't worry, if we hit Control-Z or Command-Z, that's going to take it back to the way it was before. Now, what we need to do is we need to use HTML to let the machine know that this is actually a title, and that's actually a chapter, and this is a paragraph. The computer does not know this. It may be obvious to us, but it's definitely not obvious to a machine. So the way to do this in HTML is by using tags. So a tag looks like this. We started with a less than sign, then the name of our tag. In this case, I just had the name tag. Then we close it with the greater than sign. And then the closing tag is exactly the same, but with this / at the beginning. So we have the opening tag and then the closing tag. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to write some content here in between. So we can sandwich the content with tags. Together, all of this creates what's called in HTML an element. So this will be a tag element. Although tag doesn't really exist as an element in HTML. It doesn't mean anything. So that would work, but we wouldn't really see any difference. Now, what we want to do is we want to get rid of this and we want to apply an h1 tag to this book title. The way we do that is the less than sign, h1, we close it, and then we need to close the tag here. So we're going to do less than sign / h1 and closing with a greater than sign, right? So you can see opening tag, some content, closing tag right there. Now, h1 stands for heading 1. And 1 means it's the most important heading. If we have anything after 1, we can use an h2 for a heading 2. So it's the heading that is not as important as the first heading. So in this case, because we're writing a book, well, the title of the book has an h1 because it's the most important thing in the book. Now, the next most important thing is going to be our chapter. So we can fill our chapter with an h2 tag, right? Now, this bit is a paragraph. If you had to guess, what would you think the tag would be for this one? So we're going to open it and we're going to close it here. What do you think goes inside? Maybe you guessed P1, and that's almost right. The right answer is you need to answer P. P stands for paragraph. There's no hierarchy in paragraph, so there's no P1, P2, P3. It's literally just P, so that's quite easy to remember. Now, we have a pretty basic structure, so let's go ahead and fill it out here. So what do you think should go right there? If you said H2, that's amazing. You guessed it. So I'm going to put an H2 here. There we go. What is this? That's a paragraph, correct? So we're going to add a P tag here, like so. This one is another H2. And then we wrap things up with the final paragraph. If you hold Command or Control and you press right, it will take you to the very end of the line. So that's a nice little shortcut. And we end that with a paragraph. What do you think is wrong with this paragraph here? Am I closing it correctly? Right. I'm not, right? Because what's happening here is I forgot to add the /. So that's really important. Otherwise, HTML is not going to work correctly. So syntax matters. We need to tell the machine that this is how it works. And machines are not smart enough to guess our intent. We need to really be clear in the way that we code things. Now, you can see that I haven't saved anything yet, and this on the right still looks bad. But the moment I hit Command S, there you go. Look at that. Now we have a title. It looks nice and big. We have chapter 1. It looks just a little smaller, but still prominent, still important there. Then we have paragraphs, 1, 2, 3, etc. So you can see how this is starting to take shape. It looks closely to a book. Obviously, we probably want the chapters to be longer and we want the book to actually make sense. But as an example, this is pretty good. Now, the next stuff is we want to be able to style some of these elements. So maybe I don't want the book title to have black font. Maybe I want it to have red font. So what I can do here is I can write some CSS to style things the way I want to. The way that works is we need to start with an element first. We need to create the style element. And if we do style, remember, we want to close it. So once we've closed it, this is a special tag. What I write in here is not going to be just plain text. I can actually write CSS code, which we'll go over in a minute. And that will choose how we want things to look on the page once they're there. So for example, if I want to get this book title to look different, well, I need to look at how can I find that book title on the page. In this case, we have an H1. H1 is great, so there's only one of them on the page. Let's see what happens. I'm going to type H1 and then a space and then curly braces, and I'm going to hit enter. Now, everything that you see here from the H1 to the end of the curly brace is called a selector. So what we're doing is we're selecting the H1. We're telling the browser, hey, find an H1 element on the page. And now here, between the curly braces, I will let you know exactly what it is I want to change about this H1. So in this case, we wanted to change the color of the font. So if we type in color, colon, and then we start typing a color. So for example, let's say we go with red. You can see that I get a red. It shows me that's the red color that I'm after. And then at the end, once you're done, you have to close this line with a dot and a comma, so a semicolon, this one here. If I save this, you can see that it worked. And you can see actually we have a book title in red, which is exactly what we wanted. So now let's go ahead and say that we would like the H2 to be pink. That's how you would do it. And if I hit save, now take a minute and think about what do you think is going to happen once I hit save. Do you think it will change chapter 1, chapter 2, or chapter 3? Maybe all of them. Right, so when you're programming, it's always nice to have an assumption before you try it out and see if you were right. If you're wrong, it's absolutely no problem. But the point is that you want to start building a mental model to know that you're going down the right path. And you always want to test your assumptions. You don't just want to guess that you're right. So in this case, I think that maybe it's going to just do chapter 1, right? Because that's the first H2 that it's going to find. Let's try it out. It turns out I was wrong. When you select an H2, the way that CSS works is that it's finding every single element that has this tag on the page. So in this case, it did not just change chapter 1, it actually changed all of them. Now, if your intention was to change all of them, that's amazing. But what if it's not? What if you literally just want to change chapter 1 or chapter 2 and chapter 3? What if you want to make them different colors, each of them? Well, now we need to learn a new concept. And that concept is called an attribute. So right now, this H2 and this H2 and that H2, to a machine, they pretty much look the same. There's no way to identify them. There's no way to know that they are separate things, right? No way to know which one is the chapter 1, because the machine cannot really see that the contents is chapter 1 here. We see it as a human, but the machine doesn't know that. So to give the machine a hand, I'm going to add an attribute. To add an attribute, you need to go right here, where it says H2. You click it, you press space, and now you can start typing the name of the attribute. So the name in this case is going to be class. So class is an attribute that we can use to give more information about a tag. So in this case, this H2 has a class, then we type the equal sign, and then we add little quotes in here. When you add one, the machine, the editor, will add the second one for you because we're supposed to write text within the quotes. Now here, I'm going to say chapter 1. You're not supposed to use spaces here, so whatever you want to do, instead of spaces, you can use a dash. So in this case, we have chapter -1. So now, even though this is an H2, and this is also an H2, and this is also an H2, well, what's unique about this H2 is this is the only H2 on the page that has a class of chapter 1. So now, if you had to guess, what do you think we can do here to turn chapter 1 into, let's say, blue? Great, so would you do something like this? Chapter 1, then curly braces. That looks pretty good, doesn't it? Let's check it out. Let's go color, colon, blue. I'm going to save that. Did something happen? Not really, right? So I was expecting chapter 1 to turn blue. It did not. So I failed at that, and that's fine. Failing is how we learn, right? Making mistakes is the way to go forth. So chapter 1 is not quite working the way we want to, and I'll tell you why. The reason why is because if you select something just like this, well, it's very similar to this H2 and this H1, don't you think? And what are these two things doing? Well, they're not looking for classes, they're looking for tags. They're looking for the names here in red. Instead, we want to look for those green tags in here. We're looking for a class. So this is slightly different syntax when you're looking for a class. In this case, if you're looking for chapter 1 as a class, we just need to prefix this with a little dot. You can see that this now turned to orange. And when I hit save, it works just the way we wanted it to. Right, and you could keep going. You can imagine that now, if you wanted to, you could call this chapter 2 and chapter 3, and we can give them different colors here. So we can make this one violet, for example, and we can make this one orange. Great. What do you think is going to happen when I hit save? Is it going to work? Let's try it out. So I hit Command S or Control S on a Windows machine. Great. So nothing has actually changed yet. Now, why do you think that is? It's super important to every time you had a failed assumption to really think deep about what you think went wrong and how you can correct yourself. Because eventually, the more you get right, the more that it will be ingrained in your brain what the right answer is, and the more that you're going to have to just keep writing stuff without making any bugs. And then you're going to have different bugs, but you're not always going to fall to the same mistake over and over. So it's important to really give it a deep think. Now, chapter 1 worked because we had a class. But if you look at chapter 2 and chapter 3, well, they don't have classes yet. So that's why it's failing. In this case, all I need to do is copy this. I can do Command C or Control C and come here, paste one here, paste one there. Now they're all chapter 1. So if I hit save, well, they're all blue, right? Because the machine doesn't know that these are chapter 2 and 3. We told it all 3 of these are called chapter 1. This is the styling that's applied to chapter 1, it's blue, which is not what we wanted. Right? So what we wanted is we want that one to be 2, that one to be 3. And now we can hit save. And you can see how this is working exactly the way we wanted it to. The first one's blue, the second one's violet, and the third one's orange. Perfect. So now we're able to add things on the page. This is using HTML. We're also able to style things on the page. This is CSS. So everything we've written here is CSS. It's a different language. This is HTML, that's CSS. The final one was JavaScript. So we want to finally be able to add a little bit of behavior, right? So maybe, let's say that when the user clicks on this book title, we want the pop-up to come up and to say something to the user. Maybe we want to just greet them, say hi to them. Now, to do that, we're going to have to write a new tag. This one is special, again, and it's called script. And then I need to remember to close the script here. Great. And once that's done, what we need to do is actually write some JavaScript code again here. Not again, it's the first time, but it's a different language once again. So within the style tag, we write CSS. Within the script tag, we get to write JavaScript. Now, JavaScript is a little bit more complex because it's a programming language. So there's a little bit more going on here. Don't worry about it. You're not supposed to get this right away, but I do want to show you a quick preview of what kind of things we can do once you start writing JavaScript. So for example, here, I want to work with my document. So when I type document is a special word in JavaScript here. It means the page. So when I say document, I'm telling JavaScript, hey, refer to the page. Right? That's called a document. Now, in JavaScript, objects like this document here, they have actions, so we can ask them to do things. In this case, document has an action called query selector. Right? So I need to do that with a dot. Document.query selector. So I'm saying, ask the document to run this action called query selector. The technical word for these actions are called functions. Right? But action is just as well. Now, to call an action, to perform the action, or to call the function, we have to, at the end of that query selector line, add parentheses. So once we've added parentheses, we're saying, okay, I actually want to run this action. Without it, nothing would happen. But with it, we're now telling it to actually execute this, to do something. And now, in here, we need to add a string. So that was similar to the classes. So we need to add quotes at the beginning and at the end. And now we can write some text here. So what I'm after is, I am after the H1, because I want something to happen when the user clicks on the H1. So I'm going to add H1. This is actually very similar to how CSS works, right? Here I am saying, select the H1. Well, here I am saying, select the H1. Same thing. Now, the difference between CSS and JavaScript, or one of the many differences, is that this is not a declarative language. I don't just say what I want. I have to write line by line a series of executions, a series of lines describing what I want to do, one line at a time. Now, I managed to capture my H1, but I have no way to refer to this H1 if I want to here in the next line, because it's just the next action here. So to be able to save this, we need to save it in a little box in a label so we can refer to it later. And the way that we do this is by using a special keyword called const, which stands for constant. And then we can type an arbitrary name here. and then an equal. Now what we're saying is, run this little operation here, run this action, and when it's done, store it in this variable here, which is as-staff. Doesn't make any sense right now. It's completely arbitrary, but you obviously don't want to give it that crazy of a name. You also don't want to call it X or Y or P. One-letter variables are usually not good, right? So this variable here, I'm going to call it element, because that's what it is. Even though it's arbitrary, it's super, super important that you get used to writing code that is easier to understand, because you're going to come back to your code maybe in a week's time, maybe in a month's time, maybe a year's time, and you're going to really hate yourself if when you go back, you understand nothing of what you've written because you chose X for a variable, which doesn't really tell you anything at all. So you really, really, really want to write readable code and make sure that you're doing yourself a favor, but not just yourself. Many times you're actually working with other developers as well. In fact, 99% of the time you'll be in a team and you want other developers to understand what you're doing. So writing readable code is super, super important. Don't forget that. So anytime you have a chance to write an arbitrary name, really give it a good think and make sure you're writing something that makes sense. Now, we have our element. That's perfect. What I want to do now is I want to refer to it. So I can just type element. And now I can do a little dot. And you can see that the element actually has a ton of actions that I could use. The editor is helpful enough to actually show me the actions that I can use here. Now, in particular, we said we wanted to react to a specific event, right? So when the user clicks, in programming, that's called an event. When the user scrolls, that's another event. When the user clicks, that's another event. When the user selects something. So all of those actions that the user is performing, technically we call them events. So I'm going to start typing event and see what comes up. Great. And you can see that we have three options: add event listener, dispatch event, and remove event listener. Right? This is getting technical, but the one that I'm after is I want to listen for a specific event. So add event listener it is. Now, again, this is an action. So to perform the action, I want to call parentheses here. So to open parentheses and close them. Now I'm telling on this element, call the add event listener action, right? Call that function. And the way this works, when we start calling it, you will get some information here. You don't need to worry too much about this, but this is actually super helpful. It's telling you what kind of input this action needs in order to work. And what it's telling you is the first thing is the type. So what is the type? Well, the type is, as we mentioned earlier, we can think about scroll, we can think about mouse moving. So if you enter something with a mouse or if you leave something with a mouse. So all of these are potential actions that we can perform. Now we said we wanted to be able to do something when we click on the book title, right? So I'm going to type click, and there you go. Click is one of the options that's available to me. So that first argument here is saying, I want something to happen to the element when I click it. Now I need a second argument to this function. So I need to add a little comma there. The comma, after the comma, we can say, what do we want to happen? Right? So this is quite, if you think about it, it looks super complex, but if you start breaking it down, it's actually not that hard. We're saying, find the element on the page, and now add an event listener to it. When we click the element, what do we want to happen? Right? So we're just missing that last final piece of the puzzle, which is, what do I want to happen when the element is clicked? Now, in this case, I'm going to create a function here. So this is an anonymous function. Do not give it a name. You don't need to worry too much about the syntax, but what matters is that we start with a little parenthesis. Then this is called an arrow, right? So it looks like an arrow if you think about it. It's the equal sign and then the greater than sign. Together, they look like an arrow. This is in fact called an arrow function. And now inside here, we have curly braces. Now, you don't need to memorize this at all, but what matters is the code that we actually want to run when the element is clicked will go in there. Now, JavaScript gives us a little nice helper function called alert. Sorry about that. And now with alert is a function on its own. We have to call it if we want something to happen. So what do we want to do? Well, we want to open parentheses here. And now look, it's giving me a little helpful hint. It's saying, type in your message. So that's what you want to happen, right? So what is the message that you want to show in your pop-up? So to finish this off, I can say, hi, with an exclamation mark. Now I'm going to save this code. You notice that the page refreshed. Nothing actually showed up on the page. So all of my CSS code and all my JavaScript code is not appearing on the page at all. I don't want it to show on the page, right? This is happening behind the scenes. That's why we say that JavaScript is sort of like the brain of the operation. You don't see it, but it's there. It's the man behind the curtain, in a way. So what do we want to happen? Well, we said we wanted to be able to do something when we click here. So let's have a look. Click. There you go. So the moment I click it, I get a pop-up and it says, hi. It's telling me some extra info. This is the browser, right? Saying an embedded message was shown, and that's the name of the website we're on. But we do get the message we wanted. If I hit OK and click it again, we get hi again. So that's working pretty much as intended. That's great. If I want to change the message, all I have to do is pinpoint where the message is. So here, and then I can change it. Maybe I want to add more exclamation marks and I want to say hi there. I have to remember to save that. And now click again and we see hi there. So it's working exactly the way we want it to. We're in full control of our page, right? So look again, we're able to add things to the page using HTML. We're able to add styling to the page using CSS. And then we're able to add a script using JavaScript. And the script allows us to have some behavior on top of everything else. So that's amazing. What do you think? Now, you've managed to do this in less than half an hour. How great is that? After a month in our course, our students are actually able to build a page just like this one that you're looking at in front of you. So this is a clone of the Spotify website. You can see it. It works really well. I can hover over elements and everything's working. Right now, if I click on things, nothing is happening because by month 1, you will not have seen JavaScript yet. So the behavior part comes later. So you don't need to worry about that bit yet. But after a month, students are producing products of this quality. So that's really, really good. They look amazing. And now, if you look on the left, yes, there's a lot of code. But if you take a second and breathe in, there's nothing new here. It's just building on top what we've just learned. You have more elements, you have more attributes, and that's it, right? Elements, elements, attributes, attributes. So if you really take a deep breath and look through this, it's not that scary. It looks scary at first, but if you break it down, in a month, you have plenty of time to really get comfortable and write applications such as this one. Now, once we're done with these kind of applications, what you will be able to do also is add JavaScript, like we mentioned. So in the next part of the course, you will be adding JavaScript so we can actually do things when we click. So maybe take me to a new page, play a song. Once you're done with that, we're going to move on to React. And in React, we're going to learn how to write more JavaScript. React is part of JavaScript. But that React is going to be more modern and it's going to make writing JavaScript less error prone and way more fun to use. In fact, that's the industry standard. So today, if you want to be a front-end developer, React is what you need to know to maximize your chances of getting a job. Most of the jobs today ask for React. After that, we're going to learn how to use TypeScript. So TypeScript is a new language, but it's technically not. The technical word for it is it's a superset of JavaScript. And what we mean by that is it's just more JavaScript. Exactly like JavaScript with a couple of features added on top. So it's going to be quite easy to transition and to learn some new useful features. TypeScript helps you make your code more maintainable by adding types. So when you're working with strings, you can say this is a string. When you're working with a number, you can say this is a number, right? So it's just more helpful. Once you're done with TypeScript, we're going to move on and write backends in Node.js. Node.js is a platform, but again, it's JavaScript or TypeScript, you can choose. Node.js is a backend language. What does that mean? Well, that means that we get to actually write a brain for what happens behind here. So in a backend, we can store the songs, for example, or we can store the data. So if we want to create a user, well, the user will be stored in a backend. You can think about it this way. It's not on your machine, it's on someone else's machine. It's a server because it's serving information. So you will be able to write your own servers, so then you can actually create a more complete Spotify by actually having full-fledged features like accounts. You can have songs. You can have a ton of information there. Once that's done, we're going to take a couple of weeks to also go through the computer science fundamentals. During this time, we're going to get a ton of practice so you can learn how to do interviews and really nail that job interview and technical interview so you can get your first job and you can really shine like a champ you are. And once that's done, the last thing is we're going to go into project mode. So the last bit, even though there's projects throughout the course, the last section of the course is going to be 5 weeks dedicated solely to project. We really want you to get as much practice as you can in there and to work in an agile environment, to work with other people, to break down tasks, and to learn the best practices for a software engineer to have. So once you start your new role, you're going to hit the ground running because you will be used to exactly the way they work from day one. So that's the end of our introductory lesson. I hope you enjoyed it and that you got a good feel for how Boolean works. A typical day of Boolean consists of lessons in the morning and then practice in the afternoon. In the morning, the lessons help you learn a new concept by having a conversation and going through some examples with our experienced instructors. And then, in the afternoon, you get to take everything that you've just learned and put it into practice to solidify your knowledge by going through some exercises on your own. Although you can always ask for help of our instructors if you get stuck. Now, this is just a little preview into the world of Boolean. Imagine how much you will be able to do after 6 months. If you like what you saw today, feel free to apply, and then together we'll work out if Boolean is the right course for you. I hope to see you soon.